Holy shit, you guys, this is awesome. So you know how I, and I'm assuming a lot of you guys, used to theorize that there was something that the writers weren't telling us about the Reverse Flash's powers on the Flash? I mean, it's not exactly like they were hiding it all that well.
Your powers are almost exactly like those of the Flash.
Oh, I'm not like the Flash at all. Some would say I'm the Reverse.
But without any official confirmation, all we could really do was speculate. Well, all that changed about 2 weeks ago when we finally got official confirmation that the negative Speed Force, first appearing in 2009's Flash Rebirth number 4, is actually a thing in the Arrowverse.
And so instead of tapping into the Speed Force to access my powers, I created my own. I have to warn you, Nora, it's a little bit negative.
That is awesome! Seriously though, as cool as it is that Eobard's version of the Speed Force is actually a thing on the show now, it does raise a ton of new questions for a lot of people. Like, what exactly is the negative Speed Force? How does it even work? And where did it even come from? And probably most importantly, if this is actually a thing, then how does this fit in with any of those other times we saw Eobard using the Speed Force? We've seen him use the normal Speed Force in a few different episodes now, and on top of that, Gideon straight up confirmed that Eobard messed up his connection to the Speed Force by going back in time and killing Barry's mom.
Gideon, what's happening to me?
Your latest time jump against the Flash caused a massive drain on your powers. Your cells contain no trace of the Speed Force.
That's impossible.
Your ability to move at super speed as well as travel in time has been completely depleted.
But how though? Wouldn't him having his own version of the Speed Force keep that from happening in the first place? Well, let's start with what all the negative Speed Force even is. In the comics, Eobard Thawne created the negative Speed Force as part of a plan to bring Barry out of the regular Speed Force, where he's been since 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths number 8, and corrupt his connection to it, with the idea that Barry would kill his friends and family whenever he touched them, eventually changing how the Flash was seen throughout history. It didn't really pan out the way he hoped. Honestly, I'm just surprised he didn't decide to just leave Barry where he was and just do the whole face swap thing like he did in the past instead. Yeah, he might not have gotten to see Barry's reaction to anything he was doing, but Eobard pretty much would have gotten free reign to do whatever he wanted while looking exactly like him, so even if one of the remaining speedsters did manage to stop him, I imagine he probably still could have tainted Barry's name and gotten what he wanted relatively hassle-free in the end. Makes sense to me, but what do I know, I'm just some kid making videos on the internet. Anyways, just like the regular Speed Force, the negative Speed Force is this extra dimensional field of energy a speedster can tap into when they run, but with a few tiny differences. Instead of charging themselves up with positive energy, speedsters using the negative Speed Force are really working with a whole bunch of negative energy, making them a little bit rougher, meaner, and more violent in the process. And rather than just sort of being generated by a particular speedster like the regular Speed Force, the negative Speed Force uses its positive counterpart as a power source, eating away at it like a cancer, according to Max Mercury. Speaking of, as you might have guessed, Eobard generates the negative Speed Force every time he runs, kinda like how Barry generates the regular Speed Force when he runs. Basically, the positive and negative versions of the Speed Force act like two sides of the same coin, both capable of influencing the other. One eats away and corrupts normal Speed Force users, the other can somewhat cancel out the negative effects of all that destructive energy. So, okay, cool, that's the negative Speed Force in the comics. What does any of that have to do with the version in the Arrowverse? Well, just from what we've seen so far, the Arrowverse version of the negative Speed Force seems to work exactly the same as its comic book counterpart. Like I mentioned earlier, older episodes of the show gave us the idea that Eobard was using the negative Speed Force, but we never had any official confirmation until Eobard specifically mentioned it to Nora in the episode Snowpack.
That's a little bit.
And as explained by Cisco and Barry in the most recent episode at the time I'm recording this video, titled Gone Rogue, users of the negative Speed Force give off negative tachyons, similar to how regular Speed Force users give off tachyons when they run. The difference though is that rather than slowing the speedster down, the negative tachyons allow a speedster to siphon energy from the normal Speed Force in order to power up their own movement.
I just picked up a frac ton of background particle radiation.
Particles? Tachyons?
Negative tachyons. Maybe they actually siphon positive tachyons.
Stealing speed from the Speed Force like a parasite?
Speaking of, the fact that the negative Speed Force is essentially linked to the regular Speed Force is why Eobard's speed started to fuck up after killing Nora back in season 1. Remember how I mentioned in a few of my other videos that if the timeline is changed too much, then Barry Allen won't become the Flash, meaning Eobard never becomes your typical stalker fanboy, thereby losing his connection to the Speed Force? Well, now that we know all this stuff about how Eobard's powers work, it seems like we have even more proof now that the CW version of Barry will eventually be revealed as the creator of the regular Speed Force like in the comics. Meaning if he doesn't become the Flash, then not only does Eobard not have the influence to turn himself into a speedster, but the negative Speed Force doesn't have anything to pull energy from. Really, the only difference between the comic and TV versions of the negative Speed Force is why it was created in the first place. In the comics, Thawne created it as part of his plan to pull Barry out of the Speed Force and screw him over. In the show, however, the negative Speed Force is tied into Eobard's origin. Thanks to the Season 2 episode The Reverse Flash Returns, we already know Thawne was a major Flash fanboy and gave himself super speed to be more like his idol, allowing him access to the Speed Force.
I was obsessed with you. For so long, I wanted to be the Flash. I spent years figuring out how you came to be. Duplicated the reaction. And it worked. I became like you.
But according to Snowpack, after he realized that his destiny was to become the exact opposite of the Flash, Eobard tapped into all that rage and pain that he felt knowing he couldn't be the hero he set out to be, creating a new, darker version of the Speed Force in the process.
Through your mind, crushing you, wrecking you, shattering your soul into a million little pieces. And suddenly, you're part of something different now. Part of a negative force.
That having been said though, not using the negative Speed Force doesn't make you any less of a dick like a lot of people seem to think for some reason. Yeah, Eobard seems less evil when he's not tapping into his speed, but that doesn't mean he's not a bad person anymore. Those negative emotions a speedster uses to access the negative Speed Force are still there, like you don't just automatically stop being mad or upset about something whenever you stop using it. Really, the best way I can sum it up is by saying that the negative Speed Force doesn't make a speedster evil or violent or whatever. Them being evil or violent or whatever is what allows them to use the negative Speed Force in the first place. Now, all that having been said, we still don't know how far the writers are going to take the negative Speed Force on the show. We still don't know if you can corrupt other speedsters with it, and given how Nora seemingly managed to shake off its effects pretty easily, it doesn't seem like he can right now, or if we'll ever see it get cancelled out by the regular Speed Force in some way or another. Hell, we don't even know who else in the Arrowverse might have been tapping into it over the course of the Flash's history. Will it turn out that all Red Lightning users were using it? And if so, does that mean characters like the Rival, or even Black Flash, were using the negative Speed Force? But I guess we'll see what all the writers are going to do with it as the show moves through the last few episodes of Season 5, or if it pops back up sometime in Season 6. But anyways guys, that's my take on the Arrowverse version of the negative Speed Force. If you guys agreed with anything I said in this video, or if you have your own thoughts you want to throw out there, then go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, then go ahead and click that like button, and if you're new, maybe consider clicking that subscribe button too. I've also got links to my Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, and Patreon in the description. You should probably check those out too. And if you want to see more of my content, then you can click the link to my last video. It's right there in the middle of your screen. Alright, and I will see you all next time.